How's it going, everybody? Jason here. Welcome back to the channel, and thank you so much for watching. Welcome to episode 2 of Inside the Mix, a show where a producer you've never heard of breaks down a song you've probably never heard from an artist nobody knows about. So if you liked that little introductory clip, I'm going to go through start to finish how the song came to be, what the songwriting process was as far as the structure, and then get into breaking down kind of the core elements of the mix, show you the project, the plugins that I used, and how I made all the decisions for how everything all came together. Now, I know it's a lot more fun to watch Rick Beato or famous producers talking about famous songs and stuff like that, but if you are producing music at home by yourself, all of this stuff is interconnected. So it's great to see, here's how we use these plugins to do these types of things, but how you record the song, choices that you make in the mix, types of plugins that you use, different elements that you bring in musically, all that stuff is interconnected. So I hope it's valuable for you to see how this thing started from basically using a virtual bass in GarageBand to the song that it evolved into. So first I'm going to get into the actual song structure. So the title, actually, funny story, I was in Giant Tiger, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and just walking around picking up some stuff for the family, and I saw a shirt, or it was a pillow actually. I saw a pillow and it had Southern Bells written on it, and I went, that might be an interesting lyric. So I threw that in my notes. So number one thing that I do for all songwriting is basically voice memos and notes for lyric ideas or melody ideas. So I've got a pile of those things. The actual song itself, so over the Christmas break, for whatever reason, I just couldn't make any noise in the house, so I was just sitting there with my phone and my acoustic guitar, because I couldn't come down here and be loud with anything, and started with the introductory riff to it. I just started playing around with things like oh, that's nice. So that's where that introductory riff was born, and I just recorded that right away, and I thought, okay, that's G and A. And for this song, I wanted it to be just kind of a driving song all the way through. So I'll tell you about how the halftime part kind of emerged at the beginning of it. So after I had that, I knew I wanted kind of like a chugga chugga, just something that is just really simple, that could be just a fun song. And I started just playing around with it. And then just put those two elements together using the virtual bass in GarageBand, and then the structure of the song. It's very simple. So as I was going through that, I thought, you know, I want, I think I originally had it as, I had a mix. I had kind of a double time and a half time of the G and the E. And then once I actually got it recorded and used the virtual bass, then it evolved into what the actual song is right now. There was no intention to make it a country song. It just sort of happened as I was starting to write it, and then I just started noodling around with vocal melodies. And then once it came into my brain that it should be a country tune, then your typical 1-4-5 structure, you know, G, C, D, was born for the chorus with just some little noodles in there. So the and that was it. So the structure, simple. There's an intro, verse, chorus, verse, double chorus, solo, bridge, double chorus, outro. So a typical short song. I wanted to keep the energy just up and make it simple and fun so you don't have to think too much about it. So now I'm going to switch gears into the actual recording. All right, so let's get into the mix and the actual recording of it. So once I had everything done on my phone in GarageBand, I had the structure done, and I had just a virtual instrument of a bass that was just like a picked bass going through the whole thing. That was a good enough structure to import. So I opened it up in Logic, and Logic creates these arrangement markers automatically if you have that set up in GarageBand. It's pretty cool when you import it. It just puts your structure in there right away. And the important thing about that is the next step for me, I'm going to start recording the guitars. I don't like recording just to a click, and because of, you know, I wasn't allowed to make any noise in the house, I couldn't go and record any of the drum parts because in my brain I had what they should sound like. I just dumped the Logic drummer on a track, and when you have your arrangement markers set up in Logic, it will actually write drum parts based on the flow of the song, which is actually really cool. So that halftime thing in the beginning, you know, I wanted it to be like a 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, ba, boom, boom, ba, boom, boom, like right from the beginning all the way through. And because the way that that little guitar lick was in there, it put a little halftime feel at the beginning. And I thought, oh, okay, that sounds cool. I'm going to keep that. And then I let that run all the way through, then re-recorded the bass. So as far as what it was recorded with, the bass was using my Epiphone bass that has really noisy volume pots and pickups, so you kind of have to get it going and not touch it, otherwise there'll be a whole bunch of crackling and background noise. I should probably get that thing fixed. All of the electric guitars were done with this PRS SE. Acoustic parts, everything was done with that Ovation bass using the pickup. I should have mic'd it, but I ended up just using the pickup because the pickup in that thing is very crispy and sometimes kind of flaky. All the electric guitars, clean or otherwise, were done with the Yamaha THR Songbird microphone for all the vocals and a Focusrite, Scarlett Focusrite 18i20 audio interface. Recorded everything in Logic and used very minimal set of plugins, as you'll kind of see. So I got in, just kept that actual software drum track, which I know that will put a lot of people off. You're not supposed to do that. That's not real instruments. But it actually suited the song once I got everything in there, and I decided, you know what, I'm not going to actually redo the drums because I think it fits for that style of music. So getting into breaking down the actual mix, again, I've done some videos on how to structure and organize your mixes, so everything's color-coded based on instrument, so it's a lot easier to find. Bass is on its own track. All of my electric guitars run into a summing track, so I've got a clean and a crunch that are just panned left and right, and some of the parts are similar, some are a little bit different to give it some depth. My acoustic guitars, same thing, so I used a Nashville-tuned acoustic in some spots. I've got my main Ovation here that I used for, you know, you can hear it very well in the verses, but not so much in the choruses. The other guitars don't go into a summing track, so the solo and all the little guitar noodles are on their own individual tracks, and then some percussion here. So this is just having some tambourine in the choruses and the outro, and some other little percussion elements. The drums, I actually ended up using a producer kit from Logic. The Logic drummer is actually really, really good. The different types of sounds that you can get, and I know people don't like this. Some people are just violently opposed to samples and software drummers, but it's really powerful, and it really does simulate a real kit, and there's so many customizations that you can do with the Logic drummer, but I'm not going to get too much into that. And then my lead vocals and my chorus vocals. So for the lead vocals, I broke that into verse, chorus harmonies, bridge vocals, and lead vocals in chorus. So I didn't have the lead vocal on one track because it's a different dynamic for each one. So I decided to separate those onto different tracks so I could do some different processing on each of those. And then all of my other kind of lead main harmonies roll into this lead vocal track stack here. Chorus vocals, if you've seen the first video or you've listened to kind of any of my other videos, I really like big sounding vocals. And the interesting thing about this is, you know, so many videos on how do you get a big vocal sound and all this type of stuff. Best way you do it is just sing a buttload of vocal tracks. You know, you can use a doubler, you can use some artificial harmonizing and stuff like that. The bigness comes from the imperfection from track to track. So if you're copying and pasting your vocal tracks, if that works for you, awesome. I choose not to. I choose just to sing a gazillion different vocal harmonies and melodies and things like that, because then I've got freedom in construction when I get into the final mix and everything. So as far as the actual guitars, I'll just play those isolated so you can hear the differences between the two. So that just adds a little bit of depth when it gets mixed in with the acoustic guitars, and I played it twice, obviously, because it's two completely different parts. Now, a trick as far as, you know, I'm never working on one project at a time, so what I'll typically do is I'll save a preset to whatever amp I'm using, or if I'm using a plugin, I'll save that as a preset for the song, so if I have to come back and re-record a part for whatever reason, I'll remember kind of what I had set up there. But the other cool thing you can do with Logic is you can actually create notes for each of the tracks. So I'll take a screenshot of the actual settings of the amp just in case, and I'll plunk the screenshot in there. So now if I ever have to go back, I can do that. So again, it's a pretty simple song. It's G and E in the verses, and it's G, C, D in the choruses, and then there's a C, D in the bridge afterwards. So the acoustic guitars. The Nashville-tuned guitar, the Vester guitar, just added a little bit of extra depth and element to it. So a Nashville-tuned guitar is basically the high strings on a 12-string acoustic. So you just, it's tuned exactly the same way, but the strings on it are the second string on a 12-string. And instead of using a 12-string, by playing it twice, once with a regular acoustic and one with a Nashville acoustic, for me it just gives it like a very nice bright airy sound. And then you can see I've got these ones panned left and right through here, and the acoustic just drives through the whole thing, but it's not the predominant instrument. The predominant one really is the electric guitars. So as far as recording all of the noodles and the solos, I had the entire song done, vocals and everything, and what I end up doing is I'll go for a walk and I'll listen to it 15 or 20 times, and what that will allow me to do is I'll start to hear other elements. I'll start to hear, you know what, it's kind of dead in this one spot of the verse. It needs to have maybe just like a or some other element in it. So started with GarageBand, recorded the Logic drummer here, just dropped that into a track, did the bass, did the acoustic guitars, then the electric guitars, and all of the sprinkles and elements added on top of it, including some of the vocal harmonies, were done last. So when I got into the actual vocals, one thing that I like to do, I again use the notes in Logic to come up with the vocals, and I really suck at vocal melodies and lyrics. It's just this is kind of why I'm doing this process, is because I want to get better at doing stuff like that. So what I do to come up with that is I will put, say, just the verse in loop, and I'll listen to it over and over again, and I'll just start going bum 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 ba da da, and I'll record all of that type of stuff. So I try to always start from the melody, and then I try to cram words into what would fit into that phrasing. And usually I'm just sitting here humming melodies, and I'm just typing and typing and typing with things that might kind of fit in there, and then the story of the song evolves over time. Now this one's kind of a bubblegum pop country thing, which isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I just wanted it to be just a fun anthem. Don't worry about it too much. I've already been called sexist for using the term Southern Belles, so to those people, yeah, you might want to rethink all of your life choices that led to this point. If that's what you're offended about, come on, give me a break. So getting into, I'm only going to get into a couple of more things so this video doesn't end up being too long, because most of you have probably checked out by now, but instead of a free set of steak knives, maybe, I'll give away a bag of gourmet gummy bears. So drop a comment below if you want me to ship you your gourmet gummy bears. This is not actually a contest. You may not actually receive your gourmet gummy bears. So the vocals, let's get into the background vocals. So the intro of the song. Southern bells and cocktails with my buddies on a Friday night. That came by accident. It was actually supposed to start from the intro. And the reason why I put that vocal harmony in the intro was at the very end of the song when I was singing it. I had stopped the instruments at the very end. It's all right, 'cause I'm talking about Southern bells. So because I started with the Logic drummer, it did that fill and it ended it. It ended it right at the end of wherever your arrangement track was. And I sang past that, so I extended the outro. And because I had that little vocal part at the end, I thought, what if I put that chorus harmony at the very beginning to open it up? So, like I said, all of this stuff is interconnected. The halftime feel at the beginning was because of the Logic drummer. Like I said, I wanted it to be driving all the way through, and the Logic drummer put in a halftime feel at the beginning, and I thought, hey, you know what? That's actually pretty cool. I'm going to keep that. So the same thing happened for those chorus vocals. And if I break those things down, like I said, there's no tricks to getting big chorus sounds. It's basically, sing a bunch of them. There's no shortcuts in life. So the idea that you can just kind of put a plug-in on there and do this stuff automatically doesn't really work for me. So I always sing usually 3-part harmonies twice. I'll sing the same part twice for 3 harmony parts, and then have, most of the time at least 6 background tracks, 6 backing vocal tracks. So here's the first harmony. 'Cause I'm talking about Southern bells and cocktails with my buddies on a Friday night. And then layered on the next set. 'Cause I'm talking about Southern bells and cocktails with my buddies on a Friday night. And then added the final element. 'Cause I'm talking about Southern bells and cocktails with my buddies on a Friday night. And then just mix and matched those. Now, there's some options here. This is actually the first time I've done this, so I got the chorus vocals done on this chorus, and then I copy and pasted them. So that's perfectly fine, but normally what I do is I just sing everything individually because I don't want it to sound like it was just produced in a factory like so much of the modern music is done today. And again, if that's your thing, go for it, awesome. But I try to just sing everything all the way through and avoid any kind of production stuff that makes it sound like it's manufactured. So the last part I'm going to break down is really after the solo. So when it comes into the solo, I had an idea. I'm not a country player, so I had an idea of what I wanted it to sound like. So I actually recorded the solo with my voice, and then tried to figure out how to play what I was actually singing. Things are all right. Make it all right. Alright, so the battery on my camera died as I was just getting out of that solo. So I'm going to get into the last little bits of just breaking down the harmonies, and then into looking at just some of the plugins and some of the settings that I used on the final mix. So out of the solo part, I know I wanted to have a bridge that built up and exploded outwards, and that's just a simple CD transition. So let's just listen to that. I've been waiting. So you can hear the acoustics in the left and the right sticking out. I actually wanted to use a banjo for that, but I don't have one, and with everything on lockdown, I didn't want to go out and rent one. So I ended up using just the acoustics to try to create that sound, and then I added a percussion patch on here as well. And again, yes, it's cheating because I didn't buy all these percussion things and play them myself, but I wanted to give it that kind of feel. And then get back into a double chorus and then into the outro. So the vocals, again, like all my vocals, sang them multiple times. So if I isolate just the vocal parts, you can hear how those came to be. So long, feels like I've waited all my life. Southern bells and cocktails. So that falsetto one that you can hear right at the end. Waited all my life. That one was pretty tough. So I just wanted that kind of transition and that feel that it just lifts up and gets back into the main chorus, and then do a double chorus and then get into a fade out. So the last thing I'll talk about with the vocals, again, and I mentioned this a couple of times, is there's no shortcuts to get these types of vocals. For the harmonies, I usually will just loop it and I will try to sing a whole bunch of different harmonies. Now, because I don't have a background in music theory like I mentioned on my first video, a lot of the times for me it's experimentation, but I knew that I wanted something to kind of lift up and go higher, and it actually came pretty easily to be able to do that. So getting into the mix and the processing. So this is the full project. Again, everything's color coded, so it's a lot easier for me to navigate. And pretty much the core of this entire thing is using the NLS bus and channel from Waves, and that gives it an analog console sound. Take that with a bit of grain of salt, because pretty much every plugin says it's world famous and it adds color and tone and all this type of stuff. What this does is it just adds a little bit of, depending on which console you use, it can either be a little bit of shininess or a little bit of grit or something like that. And I use this on every single one. So I usually have the channel strip, and the way that this plugin works is there's individual channels. So if you're going to load presets, there's basically, this is taking 32 channel strips, and each of them is a little bit different, because back in the day, all of the analog strips on a mixing console might have a little bit of a different tone or sound to it based on the circuitry. So they try to mimic that with this plugin, which is actually pretty neat. So it randomizes it. You can see this one is set to Neve 3, and then if I open up the next one, it's Neve 02. And then I will also apply that on any of my summing tracks and use the bus version of it as well, just to get a little bit of extra life into it. So that is on pretty much every track. And then I used the console one from Softtube pretty much for everything else. And I have a whole bunch of presets for a bunch of different tones, so I can get up and running very, very quickly to do that. And in some cases, I will also use the Softtube saturation plugin to give it a little extra element as well. And that's pretty much on every track. So every track is pretty much the same across the board for all of my instruments, because there's so many plugins out there. It's pretty easy to get overwhelmed with, you know, should I use this one or that one or the other? Through experimenting over the last couple of years, I've found presets that kind of work with certain types of instruments and the way I like to record. So it gets me up and going pretty quickly. As far as the vocals, very similar, except I did use the Studio Rack from Waves, and Studio Rack from Waves lets you mix and match a whole pile of different types of Wave plugins, and then you can map certain parameters to these macros here. So, you know, bass, if I'm adjusting the bass up and down, it's actually modifying this EQ, and it's doing something else in this parallel split section here as well. So I used the Studio Rack for that, and I used the Greg Wells voice centric plugin pretty much on all the vocals as well. I use this a lot on background vocals to kind of glue everything together. So like I said, if you want big sounding chorus background vocals, sing them a bunch of times. I typically sing every individual harmony twice and then hard pan those left and right, and I don't use pitch correction. Sometimes I'll use pitch correction on the left and not the right, or vice versa, because then you get a little bit of a different sound, but I never copy and paste the same vocal part. That's how the imperfections in it is what gets you that big sound, because it's filling in all the little cracks and spaces. So I will use on the chorus background vocals, sometimes I'll use that Greg Wells voice, and I'll crank the doubler up all the way and the shininess all the way up, and it just kind of gives a little bit of extra life. But I don't use doubles, and I don't as far as like a doubling plugin, and I don't copy and paste them. I sing them all individually. So the last bit is, and I mentioned this on the last video, is getting the vocals to sit in the mix instead of on top of it, and for that I use the vocal rider from Waves. So all of my instruments roll up to this music auxiliary stack here. So my drums are being outputted. My drums and my bass are going to a rhythm section bus here. So this is so I can add some extra glue or clarity depending on what I want the drums to sound like. And then an extra saturation plugin, and then that rhythm section is going into this music auxiliary strip. And then all of my electric guitars are going to bus 21 as well. And my acoustics are not going to that music bus because they're not really primary. And now with that Waves vocal rider plugin, I sidechain it to that music. Number one, so I can listen to just the music by itself when I'm getting into the final mix. And then number two, the vocal rider from Waves basically is just a fast volume control. So it allows you to make sure that your vocals are sitting inside the mix. So that very final step is automation. So this is automating things like in the chorus vocals or in the lead vocals, you know, that exit from the bridge where they fade out. So what I do is I just fade the volume on all of those out, and you can see that the Waves plugin, the vocal rider, actually this is just adjusting that fader in real time. So that puts the final polish on it, and then it's ready for mastering. So I might use, in this case I used a tape saturator on my stereo out, and just to give it a little bit of extra life. The rule that I've heard is mastering should be just like sprinkles on the cake. So you should have a production ready sound and song before you master. Don't think mastering is going to save a bad mix, because it won't. So I'll usually use a tape saturator on it, and then sometimes I will use this American Class A, and I just use a preset. So I just use the Master Bus Glue preset. And what that does, what gluing means in this context, is it's just finding those rogue transients and kind of gluing everything together so it sounds like a cohesive mix, as opposed to getting some weird spikes or lower volume sections in other parts. It just glues everything together. And then I will use this multimeter before I master, just so I can analyze for any rogue frequencies, or particularly here, this will show things like what your stereo field is like, and it will show you if you have any weird phase issues. So this correlation, green good, red bad. And all that means is if you've got phasing, you might, you know, if you're listening to a song and it feels like you're underwater, or it feels like one of your ears is plugged, that's a phase issue typically. So this correlation meter will just show me. If I play it here, you'll see what this does. Feels like I've waited all my life. Southern bells and cocktails. So this is just detecting any kind of weird phasing, but you might hear that in your ears, but your ears should also be the final judge, because I've had some cases where the correlation meter shows that there is some weird phasing thing, but it sounds fine. So all of that stuff gets done. I export it, and I bounce the entire project or selection to as high quality wave format as I can, and then I run it through eMastered and tinker around with it. So hopefully you stuck around to get that free bag of gourmet gummy bears. Leave a comment below. Let me know if you have any questions about this entire process. I'm going to do more in the mix things, because as I learn over the last couple of years, I'm getting the process down to kind of a science for me. So if you're new to songwriting and recording, hopefully that you find these things valuable. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.